RHCSA or RHCE is a performance-based exam. To pass this exam, you have to complete given tasks in a given time. Since it is a practical exam, you can't pass it by cramming exam dumps. To prepare for this exam, you have to practice the exam topics in the virtual or physical computer lab. RHCSA or RHCE practice lab needs at least 2 computers. If you have 2 dedicated computers, you can use them to set up a physical lab. If you don't have dedicated computers, you can create 2 virtual computers on 1 physical computer and use them to set up a virtual lab. In this video, we will learn how to set up, configure, and prepare a virtual lab to practice the RHCSA or RHCE exam topics. For virtualization, you can use either VMware Workstation or VirtualBox. VirtualBox is free software. It provides all essential features. VMware Workstation offers many advanced features, but it is paid software. If you are a student or need software only for practice, you can use VirtualBox. If you are an instructor or need software for complex tasks such as creating labs and exams for students and making video tutorials, you should use VMware Workstation. You can download the latest version of VirtualBox or VMware Workstation from their official website. Both websites also provide step-by-step instructions for installation. Based on your requirement and budget, download any one of these. After downloading, you can install it on any computer having the minimum required configuration to set up an RHCSA or RHCE lab. Virtual computers created on VMware and VirtualBox use the host computer's hardware resources. You can create virtual computers only if the host computer has sufficient resources. To set up RHCSA or RHCE lab environment, you need a laptop or a desktop with at least a dual-core processor, 8 GB RAM, and 40 GB of free disk space. To set up a virtual lab to practice RHCSA or RHCE exam topics, we need at least 2 virtual computers having the following configuration. Let's learn how to create and use these virtual computers to build a practice lab for RHCSA or RHCE. I will explain the process on both the VMware Workstation and VirtualBox. You can follow the process for the software you have. You can store a virtual machine on any partition that has enough free space. Create a folder or directory on the partition that has at least 40 GB of free disk space. Use a descriptive name for the folder. For example, if you are using VMware Workstation, you can use the name VMware HDD. Or if you are using VirtualBox, you can use the name VirtualBox HDD. Create 2 subfolders in the folder. We will use these folders to store the virtual hard disk of virtual computers. To create a virtual machine on VirtualBox, start VirtualBox. On the home screen of the VirtualBox, click the Machine menu, and click the New option. The first screen of the virtual machine creation wizard has 4 settings: name, machine folder, type, and version. Name is the unique name of this virtual machine. Machine folder is the location where VirtualBox will store this virtual machine. Type is the operating system that you want to install on this virtual machine. Version is the specific version of the operating system that you want to install. Enter the name Red Hat Server 1. Select Linux as the operating system type, and Red Hat, 64-bit, as the version. Use the Browse option and select the folder you created to store this machine. After providing and selecting all necessary details, click Next to continue. On the next screen, specify the RAM size you want to be allocated to the virtual machine. Move the slider to the right side to specify 2 GB RAM. Click Next to continue. On the next screen, we have 3 options. The first option creates the virtual machine without a virtual hard disk. The second option creates a virtual hard disk and uses it for the virtual machine. The third option allows us to select an existing virtual hard disk for the virtual machine. Since we don't have an existing virtual hard disk and need a virtual hard disk to install RHEL, we will select the second option here. Select the second option and click Create. The next screen allows us to select the hard disk file type. VirtualBox supports 3 hard disk file types: VDI, VirtualBox Disk Image, VHD, Virtual Hard Disk, and VMDK, Virtual Machine Disk. These file types represent VirtualBox, Microsoft, and VMware disk image formats. If you want to use this virtual machine only in VirtualBox, select VDI. If you want to use this virtual machine in VirtualBox and Microsoft's Virtual PC, select VHD. To use this virtual machine in VirtualBox and VMware Workstation, select VMDK. Keep default and click Next. There are two methods to allocate storage for the virtual machine. These methods are a fixed allocation method and a dynamic allocation method. The first method reserves the entire specified disk space right away. The second method uses the amount of disk space that is needed for the storage without reserving the entire disk capacity. Keep the default dynamically allocated option selected and click Next. The next screen allows us to set the hard disk size and location to store the hard disk file. By default, VirtualBox stores the virtual hard disk in the same folder. It stores the virtual machine. To specify the size for the virtual hard disk, either move the slider to the right side or manually type the size in the input box. Keep the default location and set the size to 20 GB and click Create. The virtual machine creation wizard creates the new virtual machine with the selected configuration. VirtualBox lists all virtual machines on the left side of the home screen. When you select a virtual machine, VirtualBox displays the configuration of the selected machine on the right side. Right now, this virtual machine has no operating system. To use this virtual machine in our practice lab, we need to install RHEL on it. If you have the RHEL installation DVD, insert it into the host computer's optical drive and start the virtual machine. If you have the RHEL ISO image file stored on the host computer's hard disk, you can use it to install RHEL. To use the ISO image file, select the virtual machine from the left pane. In the right pane, click the optical drive option available in the storage section. Click Choose a disk file and select the RHEL ISO image file. This process is called mounting an ISO image file to the virtual machine. After mounting the ISO image file, start the virtual machine. The virtual machine boots from the ISO image and starts the RHEL installation process. The RHEL installation process is the same on all types of virtual machines. Since the installation process is the same on all types of virtual machines, I will explain the installation process after explaining how to create a virtual machine on VMware Workstation. If you don't have or want to use VMware Workstation in your lab, you can skip the following step and go to the RHEL installation step. The process for setting up RHCSA or RHCE lab on VMware Workstation is almost identical to the process for setting up RHCSA or RHCE lab on VirtualBox. To set up an RHCE practice lab on VMware Workstation, we have to create two virtual machines and then have to install RHEL on them. To create a virtual machine on VMware Workstation, start VMware Workstation. On the home screen, click File and click New Virtual Machine. The new virtual machine creation wizard starts. On the first screen, we have two options, Typical and Custom. The first option includes only necessary settings. The second option includes advanced settings for hardware customization. Select the first option and click Next. As mentioned earlier, VMware Workstation includes many advanced features. The next screen presents one of them. This feature can install the selected OS in unattended mode. If you want to use this feature, provide the source of the installation. If you have the installation disk, insert it into the optical drive and select the first option. If you have the ISO image file of the installation disk, select the second option and specify the location of the file. If we select the third option, the wizard creates the virtual machine with a blank hard disk. Since we need a custom installation of RHEL, we will not use this feature. Select the third option and click Next. On the next screen, we need to select the operating system and the specific version of the operating system that we want to install on this virtual machine. Select Linux as the guest operating system and Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 64-bits as the version and click Next. On the next screen, Enter the name for the virtual machine and the location of the folder you created to store the virtual machine. Enter Red Hat Server 1 in the name input box and use the Browse button to select the folder you created to store this virtual machine. Click Next to continue. On the next screen, we need to set the size of the virtual hard disk. Set the size to 20 GB. We can store the virtual hard disk file as a single file or split it into several files of up to 2 GB each. If you have a plan to move this virtual machine to another computer or a USB drive, select the split into files of less than 2 GB option. Since we will not move this virtual machine to another computer, select the Store Virtual Disk as a single file option and click Next. The wizard automatically assigns the required hardware to the virtual machine. The next screen displays a summary of the assigned hardware. If you want to customize any hardware, you can use the Customize Hardware option. If the wizard assigns memory less than 2 GB, set memory to 2 GB. Click Finish to create the virtual machine. The wizard creates a new virtual machine with the specified configuration. VMware Workstation lists virtual machines in the left pane of the home screen. To use this virtual machine in our lab, we need to install RHEL on it. If you have the RHEL installation disk, insert it into the optical drive and power on the virtual machine. If you have the RHEL ISO image stored on the hard disk, attach it to the optical drive of the virtual machine. To attach the ISO image to the optical drive, select the virtual machine in the left pane. Click CD/DVD option in the right pane. Select the Use ISO image file. Click the Browse button and select the ISO image file. After attaching the ISO image file to the optical drive, power on the virtual machine. The virtual machine boots from the installation disk and presents the first screen of the installation process. On the first screen, you will see the RHEL boot menu. The boot menu provides the following options. Install Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Test this media and install Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Troubleshooting. The first option immediately starts the installation process. The second option checks the integrity of the installation media before starting the installation process. The checking process takes a significant amount of time. This is the default option. If you do not select any option, the installation process automatically selects this option after 60 seconds. The third option provides options to troubleshoot the existing installation. It does not install RHEL. You can use the up and down arrow keys to navigate between the options. To select an option, press the space key. Select the first option, and press the Enter key. The installation process loads all necessary files into the RAM. This process takes some time. The installation process starts in a graphical wizard. The first screen shows a list of supported languages that you can use during the installation. The default language is set to English. Keep the default language and click the Continue button. The next screen presents a single interface to configure all settings that the installer program needs to install RHEL. Settings are classified into 4 sections: Localization, Software, System, and User Setting. There is no particular sequence to configure these settings. Compulsory settings are mentioned in red color with an icon. If you do not wish to change optional settings, you can leave them, and the installer program will use their default values. Let's discuss these settings. Keyboard. The default keyboard layout is English. If you want to add an additional keyboard layout, you can use this option. Language support. By default, the installer program supports only the language you have selected on the previous screen. This option allows you to add support for an additional language. Time and date. This option allows you to localize the time zone, date, and time. Adjust the required settings. Click the Done button in the upper left corner to save the changes and return to the installation summary screen. Connect to Red Hat. This setting allows you to download updates during the installation. If you have a Red Hat account and an active subscription to Red Hat's subscription management service, you can use this option. If you configure this option, the installer program will check for updates during the installation. If it will find any updates, it will install them during the installation. Since we are not allowed to use the internet in the exam, we do not need to touch this setting. Installation source. This option allows you to change the installation media. Generally, this option is used to perform a network installation. To perform a network installation, select this option and specify the protocol, hostname, or IP address of the network server, and the path to the files. To use the default source, leave this setting intact. The default source is the source you use to start the installation. Software selection. This option allows you to select the base environment and add-on software packages. Base environments are predefined groups of software packages designed for specific usages. Since we will use this system to practice for RHCSA or RHCE exam topics, we will select the server with GUI base environment. This environment includes all packages that we need to perform the tasks that need to be performed on the RHCSA or RHCE exam. Installation destination. This option allows you to specify an available local disk or a remote disk for partitioning and installing RHEL. The installer program automatically selects the local disk for automatic partitioning. You only need to approve the action. If you approve the action, the installer program will automatically create all necessary partitions on the selected disk. The installer program will use the entire disk for partitioning. Since we are preparing this system for the practice of the RHCSA or RHCE exam topics, we need some free space on the disk to practice disk management related topics. To do this, we have to create necessary partitions manually. If you have multiple disks, select the disk you want to use for the partitioning. Then, select the custom option and click the Done button. If we select the custom option on the installation destination screen, the next screen allows us to specify the manual layout of the disk. To set up the environment that we need to practice, we will use the following disk layout. To create the custom layout, click the Add button. Select the mount point/boot. Specify the size 500 megabytes, and click the Add Mount Point button. Click the Add button again. Select / from the drop-down options of the mount point. Specify 10 GB in the desired capacity input field. And click the Add Mount Point button. Repeat the same process and add the swap partition. The installation process does not implement this layout to the disk until we manually verify it. If you want to make any change in this layout or create the entire layout again, you can use the Reset All option. This option will reset the current layout. To implement the current layout, click Done. Before creating partitions on the disk, the installation wizard shows a summary of partitions that you have created. If it all looks good, click the Accept Changes button to approve the new disk layout. Kdump. Kdump is a service that creates a crash dump when the kernel crash. Due to any reason, if the kernel crash, this service exports a memory image of the kernel to debug and determine the cause of a crash. By default, this service is enabled. You don't need to change this setting. Network and hostname. These settings allow you to configure a hostname and IP configuration on all detected network interfaces. The default hostname is localhost.localdomain. The default IP configuration is off. On a normal installation, you should configure these settings. But if you are installing RHEL on a virtual machine, I would recommend you to leave these settings. These settings are system-specific settings. It means these settings must be unique to each system on the network. Virtual machines support the cloning feature that allows us to create a new virtual machine from an existing machine. The new virtual machine will be the exact copy of the existing machine. If you want to use the cloning feature, you should not configure any system-specific settings. Since we will use the cloning feature to create the virtual machine, leave these settings intact. Security policy. This setting allows you to install RHEL under the several restrictions and recommendations defined by Security Content Automation Protocol. Rules and recommendations are grouped into profiles. In the production environment, you can select a profile that matches your requirements. But in the lab environment, you should keep the default profile. User settings. The installation process automatically creates the root user account. The root user account has the highest privilege on the system. You need to set a complex password for this account. If you want to use a simple password, you have to confirm it twice. User creation. This setting allows you to add a regular user account. We will add regular user accounts after the installation. That's all settings we need on the installation summary screen. To begin the installation, click the Begin Installation button. The installation process takes 30 to 40 minutes to install RHEL on the selected disk. During this process, it does not need any input or action from you. Since the installation process does not provide any options and does not need any actions in this process, I am fast forwarding the video to the last screen of the installation process. On the last screen, you need to reboot the system. Click Reboot System. If you are using the RHEL installation disk, remove the disk when the virtual machine starts again. If you are using the RHEL ISO image file, you can keep the ISO image mounted on the optical drive. The installation process does not install all packages to the hard disk. It installs only the packages that are part of the server with GUI base environment. While practicing RHCSA or RHCE exam topics, we often require additional packages. RHEL ISO image file contains all packages. To install additional packages, we will have to mount the ISO image again. So, it is better to keep the ISO image mounted. There are some post-installation tasks that we need to complete before we can use RHEL. These tasks are license agreement, Red Hat subscription, and user creation. RHEL presents these tasks in an initial setup wizard. The license agreement allows you use to RHEL. This is a compulsory task. You can't use RHEL without accepting the license agreement. To accept the license agreement, click Licensing. Click I accept the license agreement. And click Done. Red Hat subscription allows you to register the system with Red Hat's subscription management service. In the lab environment, we don't need to register the system to Red Hat's network. Leave this setting intact. The user creation option allows you to create a regular user account. We will create regular user accounts later. Click Finish Configuration. If you have installed RHEL on a virtual machine and want to use the cloning feature, use this stage of the machine. At this stage, the machine contains the default installation of RHEL without any system-specific settings. To use the cloning feature, power off the machine. Both VirtualBox and VMware Workstation support the cloning feature. This feature allows us to create a new virtual machine by cloning an existing virtual machine. As discussed earlier, for RHCSA or RHCE lab, we need at least 2 virtual machines with RHEL installation. We have created one virtual machine and have installed RHEL on it. By cloning this virtual machine, we can prepare the second virtual machine with RHEL installation in a few minutes. To create the clone, select the virtual machine from the left pane, and right-click, and click the clone option. The cloning process starts in the wizard. On the first screen of the wizard, enter the name for the new virtual machine. Select the folder you created for the second virtual machine. Leave remaining settings intact and click the Next button. We can create 2 types of clone, full clone and linked clone. If we choose full clone, the new virtual machine will be created as an independent virtual machine. If we choose linked clone, the new virtual machine will be created as a linked virtual machine. A linked virtual machine shares hard disk image file with the main virtual machine. In our lab, we need 2 independent virtual machines. Select full clone. Click clone. The cloning process takes a few minutes. Once the cloning is done, the new virtual machine will be listed in the left pane of the home screen. To clone a virtual machine in VMware Workstation, select the virtual machine in the left pane and right-click. On the right-click context menu, click Manage and click Clone. The cloning process starts in the wizard. Click Next. VMware Workstation allows us to save snapshots of a virtual machine. A snapshot is a particular state of a virtual machine. For example, you make some configuration changes and create a snapshot. The snapshot reflects the changes. When creating a clone, you can specify the snapshot to create a clone with the configurations saved in the snapshot. Select the first option and click Next. On the next screen, select the Create a Full Clone option and click Next. On the next screen, enter the name for the new virtual machine. Select the folder you created to store the second virtual machine. Click Finish. The cloning process takes a few minutes. Click Close to close the cloning wizard. VMware Workstation lists the new virtual machine in the left pane of the home screen. After installation, when you start the system first time, RHEL presents a welcome wizard. In this wizard, RHEL presents some user-specific settings and forces you to create a regular user account if haven't created yet. Click Next. The next screen has a privacy option for the location service. Click the Off button to turn off this feature. The next screen allows the user to set up his online account on this system. Click the Skip button. On the next screen, you have to enter the name of the user. From the entered name, the wizard automatically generates the username. If you want to use another username, you can change it. After typing the name and username, click the Next button. On the next screen, set a password for the user account. Click Next. Click the Start using Red Hat Enterprise Linux button. When the user log in the first time, GNOME, the default desktop of RHEL, presents several help videos on the first screen. This screen will not appear the next time. You can watch these videos to learn about the GNOME desktop features and how to use them. For now, click Close. In our lab, we will use the first computer to configure various settings and services and the second computer to test them. We can use the second computer for the testing only if it has the proper connectivity with the first computer. By default, VMware Workstation or VirtualBox does not add a virtual computer to a virtual network. Unless two virtual computers are connected to the same virtual network, they will not communicate with each other. To join two virtual computers in a virtual network, we need to create a virtual network and add the virtual computers to the virtual network. Open VMware Workstation and select a virtual machine from the left pane. On the right pane, click Network Adapter. In the Network Connection section, select the LAN segment option. If you have already created virtual networks, VMware lists them in the drop-down. Use the LAN segments option to create a new virtual network and rename or remove an existing network. Create a new virtual network and select it. Click OK. Select the second virtual machine for the left pane, and click the Network Adapter option in the right pane. In the Network Connections section, select LAN segment and select the virtual network you created on the first virtual machine. Now, both the virtual machines are members of the same virtual network. Select the virtual machine for the left pane and click the Settings option in the right pane. The virtual machine settings will open in a new window. Select the Network option in the left pane. Select Adapter 1, and click the Enable Network Adapter option. Click the Attach to drop-down and select the internal network. Enter the name for the new virtual network and click OK. Repeat the same process on the second virtual computer except for creating a new virtual network. On it, select the virtual network that you created on the first virtual computer. Now both virtual computers belong to the same virtual network. While installing RHEL, if you did not configure the default hostname and network settings or use the cloning feature to create the second virtual machine, you need to configure or set the hostname and IP address to complete the lab setup. Each computer needs a unique hostname and IP address to communicate with other computers on the network. To configure the hostname and IP address, power on the virtual machine and log in with the root account. Click Activities. Type Settings in the search box. Click Settings. Click Network option in the left pane. Turn on Wired Network. Click Settings. Click IP4. Select Manual Method. Set the IP address to 192.168.0.1 and netmask to 255.255.255.0. Click Details tab. Click the Connect Automatically option. Click the Apply button. Click Details in the left pane. Set the hostname to Server 1. Restart the virtual machine. After restart, log in with the root account again. Keep the first virtual machine on and start the second virtual machine. Log in with the root account. Repeat the same process. Set the IP address to 192.168.0.2, and net mask to 255.255.255.0. Set the hostname to server 2. Restart the virtual machine. Log in with the root account. To test and verify the setup, power on both virtual machines and log in with the root account. Open a terminal. The hostname command prints the hostname of the computer. The IP address show command displays configurations of all the active interfaces. Use the same commands on the second virtual machine to verify the hostname and IP configuration. You can use the output of these commands to test and verify your setup. To test connectivity between both virtual computers, you can use the ping command. By default, the ping command sends infinite numbers of packets in a sequence, one at a time. If you get the reply in the output of the ping command, it verifies that both computers have proper connectivity. To break this sequence, press the Ctrl+C keys. Now, this virtual lab is ready to practice RHCSA or RHCE exam topics. If you face any problem, you can use the following troubleshooting steps. Check the name of the virtual network. Both virtual computers must belong to the same virtual network. Make sure you log in with the root account. You can't change the host name and networking settings from a regular user account. Make sure you click the Connect Automatically option available under the Details tab of the network setting. By default, Linux does not start the networking when you start the computer. If you do not select this option, the networking will not start. Before testing connectivity, make sure both the virtual computers are powered on. That's all for this video.